Hi, I want to talk to you today about a perspective on reality known as Perspectivism. It holds that reality contains many different perspectives, and we're going to look at it in the tradition of Jainism, so it'll be specifically a Jainist Perspectivism we study. Perspectivism, as we'll see, is an idea that's closely related to relativism, historicism, and some other developments, but it's not the same thing. In fact, it's different from those in a very interesting way. And it strikes a lot of people as, in a sense, more plausible than relativism across the board, a perspective that does have a view on reality underlying it, and if you want to think of it that way, something like an absolute view of reality, but not in the traditional sense at all. So what is perspectivism? Well, let's start by thinking about the religion that it arises from in this context. Jainism is a religion and philosophy tracing all the way back to Mahavira, the thought of someone in the 6th century BCE. Mahavira was a contemporary of Confucius, of the Buddha, of Lao Tzu, of the very earliest Greek philosophers such as Thales. And so Jainism is something that is as ancient as Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. It's something that is a religion developing out of a set of ideas, moreover, closely related to some of the key ideas of Hinduism and Buddhism. The central idea is ahimsa, a kind of non-injury. One should not injure other living beings. That is a view that is found in the fundamental sutras of Jainism, like the Akaranga Sutra, but it's found in many other texts as well, and it really has a foundational role, appearing in those other religions to be sure, in a very important role. But for Jainism, it is even more fundamental. Well, that emphasis on nonviolence, on non-injury toward other beings, ends up having an intellectual side to it too. It leads to a version of perspectivism, and it is the earliest version of perspectivism that I can think of. Really, the origins of this view, I think, can be fairly traced to Jainism. Well, a Jainist metaphysics is based on this sort of idea. There are basic vows, and including, among them primarily, a vow of non-injury, of ahimsa, but also others of truthfulness and so forth, that are fundamental to Jainism. But the thought is that that can be fulfilled. Those vows are something we can live up to, only from a certain metaphysical standpoint. Any conviction that you are in possession of the absolute truth, absolute knowledge, you have the absolutely correct ethical standpoint, for example, or conception of how to live, is likely to lead you into trouble and to violating your vows. How? Well, it may lead you to injure others for the sake of that value you take to be absolute. It may be that you simply become attached to it, and that attachment becomes something that replaces the convictions you have and the attachment you should have to those vows and to that way of living. So basically, if you are convinced you have the absolute truth, you are likely to view it as something that is worth living for, but also worth killing for and worth dying for. And the Jainist is deeply suspicious of that idea. Anything that is really worth living for in that sense is worth killing for. And the Jainist says, I don't think anything should be worth killing for. I really don't think you should be doing injury to any other living being. So perspectivism is something like ahimsa, this non-injury principle, non-violence principle, on the intellectual realm. It's the view that truth is relative to a perspective, a standpoint, a point of view. Now, so far that just sounds like relativism, right? Relativism is the view that there's no such thing as absolute truth. The truth is relative to a society or a culture or an interpretive community, a conceptual scheme, a historical era, maybe to an individual person. Well, perspectivism is similar to that because a perspective is fundamental. It's something held by a person or at a historical time or by a culture or an interpretive community, etc. But nevertheless, there's a difference. To say that truth is relative to a perspective or a standpoint or a point of view is more like saying it's relative to a certain position one takes toward the world than it is saying it's just relative to where you start from and it doesn't really connect to the nature of the world. Now, on the view of the perspectivist, absolute truth isn't incoherent. It isn't impossible. but it's something like the limit of all those different perspectives. It's something we can't attain. We always view things from a certain perspective. Truth is relative to that perspective. But God, or some enlightened being perhaps, maybe could see things from different perspectives, maybe even from all perspectives at once. So the problem isn't that there's no such thing as absolute truth, that the whole idea is incoherent, that truth is by its very nature relative to an interpretive community or a conceptual scheme or an individual person or something like that. No, it's that we're always seeing the world from a certain perspective. Truth is relative to the perspective we're taking on the world. But that doesn't mean the world doesn't have a character. It doesn't mean that there aren't absolute truths about the world. It just means that we're limited in our perspective on that world. Well, it does entail that limitation. And so we should be modest intellectually. We should not think we have the absolute truth. We should not think that others are absolutely wrong. But we can approach the absolute truth by considering more and more perspectives. And so there is an advantage, the Jainist thinks, in looking at things from different points of view, at seeing things from different points of view at different times in your life, or in reading history, or studying anthropology, finding out how different people at different times in different cultures have approached various problems and have thought about them. Read different kinds of thinkers. Expose yourself to different sets of ideas, different conceptual schemes. You aren't trapped in your own standpoint. You can stand over here, right? You can stand over there. You can't say, well, I only see things as a contemporary citizen of this world sees things. I can't imagine how an ancient Egyptian or an ancient Greek or someone who was in the ancient Middle East would have seen things. I can't imagine how somebody who was living in England in the 14th century might have seen things. You don't need to imagine it. You can read what they said. And so Perspectivism says, look, yes, of course you're limited in your points of view, but other people have been too, and they've been looking at things from different points of view. You can vicariously see things from their point of view by reading literature, by studying history, by looking at anthropological accounts, by doing sociology, just by traveling around the world, talking to other people. All of that exposure is helpful to you. It is something that's going to expand your horizon, expand your perspective. Now, notice how many other views neglect that sort of obvious point. A lot of us think, yeah, there's a huge advantage to travel, to talking to people, to reading not just people writing at your own time, but to reading history, reading literature, reading imaginative accounts about how it would be to live and so forth. All of that's valuable. And the Jainist says, of course it is. It's because each one of those sources lets you see the world from a different point of view. None of them, even the totality of them, is not giving you the absolute truth, but you're getting more and more perspectives, more and more understanding of reality as you go by. The view is often described within Jainism as non-absolutism, a rejection of the idea or of the claim to absolute knowledge. It is also translated as non-one-sidedness. And the idea is this: no one statement captures the truth absolutely. In fact, not even a collection of statements captures the truth absolutely. Everything we say is true, at best, in some respect. Okay, the term here is syat. It is true, maybe, in some respect. It is not true absolutely from all points of view in all respects. Nothing is true simpliciter. That is to say, nothing is true, period. The end. No, it's true from a certain point of view. It's true in a certain respect. It's true, perhaps. Of course, one should see it from different perspectives to see if you continue to agree with that truth. Of course, the same is true of falsehood. Nothing is absolutely false either. So every statement approaches its topic from some point of view, and to understand a topic, you've got to see it from many points of view. Just as nothing is absolutely true, nothing is absolutely false. No matter how outrageous something someone says is, you should listen carefully for the element of truth in it. Try to understand the perspective, because from some perspective, that looks right. Somehow from the perspective of that person, that appears to be the truth. So try to understand what that perspective is, because there is a side of things where what you think it is, well, that doesn't appear to be the case. So nothing is absolutely true, but it means nothing is absolutely false. everything is true from a perspective in a certain respect, but also false from a perspective in a certain respect. Well, what follows from that, the Jainist says, is we should respect people, no matter what they believe or say, because every statement contains some element of truth. Everything is true from one point of view. From one side, that seems to be right. Now, that's not to say some aren't better than others. Some things are going to be true from many different perspectives on many different sides, and you're going to keep compiling additional evidence, additional points of view and saying, yes, still looks good. Other things you're going to look around and say, oh, that initial view was pretty misleading. And so you're going to give up on pretty quickly. But nevertheless, the idea is not that, hey, everything is as good as everything else, then you can say anything you want. No, instead here the point is, look, everything is capturing some insight. Everything that somebody sincerely tells you, at any rate, is really giving you some perspective on how the world looks from their point of view. And that deserves respect. It looks that way from their point of view. Might be that in the end you say, well, that isn't how it looks from most points of view. And that might be true. But there's a perspective from which it does appear to be that way. So treat people with respect. Respect those statements. Try to understand from what angle it actually looks the way that person sees it. There is some point of view that makes sense of that idea. Here's the underlying thought about reality that goes with this view. Reality itself is many-sided. It is multifaceted. That's why we have to beware of one-sidedness and reject that. It's one-sidedness that's the problem. We think we've got everything captured in this one dimension or in this one set of perspectives we've got in reality. And the Jainist view is that's not the way reality is. Life is complicated. The world is complicated. It's many-sided. It is many-dimensional. It's got, in fact, infinitely many facets and infinitely many dimensions to it. Some of these are opposites, and some of them are complementary to one another. It's easy to make the transition from this facet to that facet. Maybe you can see a number of these facets at once. It's like an incredibly complex diamond with many, many different facets to it. So anything we say is going to be true about some of those facets and false about others. Nothing we say is going to capture the full, infinitely multifaceted nature of reality. So anything we say is going to hold best, maybe, perhaps, in some respect, from some point of view. It's also going to be false from some point of view, in some respect. You can never capture that whole truth. That's not to say there isn't a whole truth. You can talk about that in the abstract as this kind of combination of all the possible perspectives, all the possible respects. But we're trapped within a perspective at any given point, and even when we are able to appreciate different perspectives, we're still going to experience in our lives only finitely many out of this infinite, multifaceted, complicated, and wonderful world. Here is a story that Jainists like to tell. It's also a popular story in Hinduism, Buddhism, and various other religions in Asia especially. But it's sometimes told as a children's story. It's a very powerful tale of the blind men and the elephant, and it has many different artistic representations as well. Here's the general idea behind the blind men and the elephant. These blind men encounter an elephant. They're trying to understand what it's like. It's rather like us encountering the world, trying to understand what it's like. And of course, they see it very differently. One grabs hold of the tail, one a leg, one the side, one the trunk. One is grasping a tusk, and so on. And they perceive different aspects of the elephant. They're all perceiving aspects of that elephant, but they're drawing conclusions about the entire elephant that, of course, are not justified by simply exploring that aspect. Here is a marvelous poem that describes this. It was 6 men of Hindustan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy the mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against its broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "Bless me, it seems the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of his tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here, so very round and smooth and sharp? To me 'tis mighty clear that this wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, then boldly up and spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out an eager hand and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain, quoth he. 'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree. The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, E'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can, this marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope than seizing on the swingy tail that fell within his scope, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope. And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. All were in the wrong here. Notice in that the elephant is not entirely like a wall or like a rope or like a snake or like a tree. They all were wrong because they thought the facet they had access to was the entire elephant, was reality itself. But each was partly right. Nothing any of them said was absolutely wrong either. But they were all in the wrong in that they thought reality was captured by their own finite, one-sided observation. Well, accompanying this non-absolutism, perspectivism, non-one-sidedness view is a view about language. It's sometimes called maybeism, or sometimes it's called relativism, but I think it's not really relativism. It is known as a view that language can express the truth only from some point of view. Syadvada is the term in Sanskrit. So the underlying thought is, look, language, yes, tries to describe reality, but it can express the truth about reality only from a point of view. It can't tell you exactly what reality is like. It corresponds to reality only from a certain point of view, only in some respects. Reality far outstrips the ability of language to describe it. Well, non-absolutism then embraces and implies a positive pluralism of perspectives. It takes a lot of different perspectives to give us some idea of what reality is really like. Reality is so rich that it makes true with qualifications any intellectual stance. Every view ends up being true from a certain point of view. There is an aspect of reality that captures. And so there's a sense in which, look, it's kind of hard to go wrong. It's maybe impossible to go completely wrong about reality, because there's always some point of view that would actually justify that, some point of view that would capture, some facet of reality that's really reflecting. So reality is so rich, so infinitely multifaceted, that it can underlie and give rise to opposite pictures, opposed pictures, contrary theories of the world. They can nevertheless be capturing the way the world is from a certain point of view, in a certain respect. Now, what this means is that perspectivism is not the same as skepticism. It is not the view that we simply can't know which perspective on the world is right. The skeptic tends to think, I've got all these different ways of viewing things, there's no neutral ground to tell who's right. But in principle, you might say, one of them might be reflecting the true nature of reality, just that I can't know which one it is. That is not the perspectivist view, because it promises a reconciliation of these opposed points of view and says, well, look, maybe one of them is right. That is to say, the skeptic says maybe one of them is right. But the perspectivist says, look, all of them are in a sense right. All of them are capturing some facet of reality. So here's the problem. The problem with those various people contending, and we say, well, if only we had some neutral ground for telling who's right. There's no neutral ground. The skeptic's right about that. But on the other hand, they're all in a sense right. They're all giving you views that really do arise out of reality, really do arise from a certain point of view, and are giving you insight into the nature of reality from that point of view. And so the problem isn't anybody's claim about the world. It's right from a certain point of view. The problem is that those people are claiming that's the way the reality, the way the world absolutely is. They're blind to the truth of their opponent's theories. And so the problem isn't, hey, I don't know who's right, so I should suspend judgment. The point is, they're all right from a certain point of view. And so it's my job to figure out, well, what those points of view are, and to see the world from as many points of view as I can, so that I can try to get an idea of what this wonderful, multifaceted reality really is like. Of course, I'm never going to quite get there. Reality is so many-sided that I'm not going to be able to achieve seeing things from all points of view at once. But that doesn't mean the idea of an absolute truth is incoherent at all. It's in that sense, perspectivism is not relativism. The absolute truth is something like a limit that we can only attain by seeing the world from all possible perspectives. So we can't do that, but maybe some being could, maybe God could. And so for God, there might be an absolute truth about the world. The world can be a certain way, and it can really be that way. It's just that we are seeing a finite collection of the perspectives on that infinitely complex reality. Well, the point then is not to deny, but to affirm seemingly incompatible perspectives. Different people have different points of view. The skeptic says, none of you know what you're talking about. Let's suspend judgment. The perspectivist says, all of you know what you're talking about from a certain point of view. The problem is just that you think that's what's true, period. It's not true, period. It's true from a certain point of view. And so what you have to do is try out all those different views. Try taking all those perspectives. Don't look for a neutral ground. There's no neutral ground. But you can see things from different points of view and get a richer understanding of the nature of the world. Jainists develop a special sevenfold logic that I'll talk about separately. It's called a sevenfold predication doctrine that tries to develop the logic of maybeism and give you ways of disarming controversy. It's meant to provide the tools for intellectual nonviolence, a way to approach other people not by saying, I'm right, you're wrong, but instead of saying, you're telling me how things look from a certain point of view. I have no doubt they do look that way. Here's how it looks from my point of view. Let's talk. Let's talk so that we can see and appreciate each other's points of view, maybe find out something deeper about the nature of reality, because we can see that there are different facets that we're describing. Is this view in the end self-defeating? Some people have said, look, in the end, this is just one more perspective, right? If everything's true just from a perspective, well, then Jainism and this doctrine of perspectivism is true just from a perspective. The Jainist says, sure. It's not meant to be an absolute claim. I'm not saying, hey, here's how the world absolutely is. It's infinitely multifaceted. And so truth is I'm telling you as an absolute truth. Truth is available to us only relative to a standpoint. That would be like practicing non-injury toward everyone except oneself or something like that. No, look, this is just a perspective. Here's my perspective on reality. All of your perspectives are capturing something. Reality is infinitely complicated. And so that's my perspective. It's one that tries to say each of your perspectives has a point of view that really is saying something about reality that deserves to be called true from that point of view. It's just one more perspective. I'm not claiming absolute truth for it. None of you should claim absolute truth for your perspectives either. And so the Jainist says, there's nothing self-defeating about this. I'm not saying this from an absolute point of view. I'm just saying, here's my perspective. My perspective is truth is relative to a perspective, and that reality is multifaceted and infinitely complex, and that's why. So the idea is non-harmfulness requires humility on the intellectual scale, as well as truthfulness and a variety of virtues in ordinary interactions with each other and with non-human animals. It's just one perspective alongside others. It's not the only perspective. However, if it's true, if that is to say, the Jainist perspective is right and is at least capturing some aspect of reality, there is a sense in which reality really does have this infinitely complicated feature to it, and that all of the perspectives we take are really just capturing the world from a certain point of view. What that means is that each of us is trying to articulate how the world looks from a point of view. All of those perspectives deserve respect. All of those perspectives, in the end, are going to contribute to an understanding of that rich, marvelous, diamond-like reality.